You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. I have a really great guest today, Ignacio Contreras, Director of 5G Products at Qualcomm. We're going to talk about realistic expectations for 5G this year and next year. You know, there's a lot of buzz about 5G. I know a little bit about it, but we're going to shine some light on how it works and how it's going to benefit people in their communications. So, Ignacio, thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you so much, Richard, for having me. And, very exciting and busy days on this end as 5G launches across different regions, different countries. So happy to have a chat with you about this.
Yeah, so what is 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and how is 5G going to be different? Maybe you could recap a little bit of technologies we've all been using to communicate.
Sure. Let me put it this way. 5G is defined as the fifth generation of cellular technology, right? And let me provide you some historical context of that to see how we got here and what's different about 5G overall. So basically, since cellular technology got started and deployed starting on the early 80s, technology has been evolving constantly, but we have seen roughly several generations of cellular technology, which basically are fundamental technologies different from what has been deployed previously. So starting on the 80s, we saw 1G, which was focused on mobile, basically in voice communications and these big analog devices like what Gordon Gekko used to use on the Wall Street movie. And we all remember that.
The big brick cell phones, yeah. The car
Absolutely,
phones.
But it was a breakthrough technology at the time, right? You can just move your phone with you anywhere much. So as cellular technology got more traction and more use, we saw on the 90s the rise of what's the second generation of cellular technology, or 2G, which basically was using digital technology to be able to pack more voice calls, more capacity into the same frequencies or spectrum assets that operators were using to make the system more economically feasible as things were scaling, right? And bringing new capabilities in terms of better voice quality and ability to send text and messages that came with 2G. Then on the 2000s, we saw the 3G coming out, which brought the first internet connectivity to phones, and the ability to do multimedia messaging, email, and some other initial internet functions within your mobile device. And then on 2010, approximately, we saw the rise of 4G networks and devices, which was all focused on mobile broadband and bringing this high-speed internet connectivity into your smartphone device. So, and now we are about to see the launch of what's called all about 5G networks and devices starting this year with a new set of capabilities. So what you see here...
It's funny, when I think about 1G, and like you mentioned Gordon Gekko, I guess you would have maybe some texting, but 99% of it would be a cell phone to a landline call. And then over time, I'm sure there was some transition of more cell phone to cell phone calls. And then, nowadays I've heard that, people don't call nearly as much as they'll text and message and use other platforms. So what has been the evolution of the types of communication that have gone across, these networks, and how has that affected them?
Yeah. What we have seen overall, yes, is that all the prior generation of mobile technologies were focused pretty much on the phone form factor, right? And how people first communicate with each other, and then how people connect to the internet. What makes 5G very unique this time is that 5G has been conceived and actually has been designed not just to connect people and phones overall, but to connect all kind of other things and devices, whether it's your car or your PC or the gas meter that will sit for 10 years underground, connecting to the utility and sending information about your gas usage, to robots and equipment that will be on the manufacturing plant. So what makes 5G very unique compared to all the other generation of cellular technology is that it has been designed and conceived not just to connect phones, but to connect all kind of things into what we call the Internet of Everything. And that was kind of a makes 5G unique, and that brings a new set of capabilities that are required into the network to support the wide variety of use cases that we will see using 5G on the long run. So as you see, yes, every 10 years or so, there's roughly a new generation of cellular technology, but 5G is fundamentally different because it's not just for phones, it's for to connect many other things. Phones will be faster, yes, and people will see multi-gigabit speeds now with 5G, and will continue evolving what has been the the progress of networks with 4G LTE. But on top of that, you will start seeing manufacturing plants connected with 5G, and VR headsets or AR glasses connected with 5G. It has been fundamentally designed to support many more use cases overall.
So, okay, what can people expect? Clearer phone calls, faster connect time, faster data usage? I mean, what are some of the metrics that you think people will see that are different?
Yeah. So with launches starting this year in 2018, as 5G launches across United States, Europe, Japan, Australia, South Korea, and also China, all these first wave of launches will be still focused on mobile broadband experience. And what people will perceive and will enjoy with this first wave of 5G smartphone devices is faster data speed. So we're now seeing the capabilities to deliver multi-gigabit speed into your phone, the same kind of speed that you get today with a fiber connection into your home, and also lower latency. So it's that means that the connectivity will not only be faster, but more responsive. And this is a key factor in some of the use cases like mobile gaming, for example, particularly cloud gaming applications with multiplayer capabilities, in which at the end, how responsive is the network or not can define if you are alive or dead, right, within your own game. And that's very important for gamers overall. So what people will see initially with 5G in the initial deployment is, of course, more of a near instant access to cloud services. So when you are collaborating on a document that's sitting on the cloud or using cloud processing or storage, it will feel like it's native to your phone. It's less distinguishable what actually is occurring on the cloud versus what's occurring on your phone on its own. You will see, of course, much faster downloads overall and a more kind of a stable connectivity experience, enjoying videos and video calls, video conferences as well. AR applications now will benefit more from 5G, given the faster responsiveness. It's easier for the cloud to process and create an overlay that at the end will reflect into your phone and will be drawn on top of your camera input. And things like video collaboration we expect to be much more prominent on a 5G world. And following that first wave of launches, starting next year and the following with the evolution of 5G, we will start seeing 5G going into cars with vehicle-to-vehicle communications, for example, or we see a lot of interest on industrial settings and how 5G can help on a manufacturing plant to replace Ethernet cable, for example, and be able to have a plant that's much more easier to reconfigure. So you can produce multiple products and not spend much time rewiring the whole premise, but just moving equipment around and be able to connect them with the same level of reliability and quality of service that today you expect from an Ethernet connection overall.
So what are some of the parameters of 5G? I drive around and I'll see cell phone towers. 5G, from what I've heard, again, it packs more data in the transmission, but it doesn't go as far. So what will a city look like when 5G is fully deployed in it? Will we see little transmitters everywhere, or infrastructure wise, how does it look different from what's here now?
No, actually, I think that what you refer is to what's called 5G millimeter wave. So yes, 5G enables the use of new frequencies or spectrum assets that are kind of a much higher in terms of frequencies, new spectrum that was supposed to be impossible to work with for mobile use cases. You're right, that doesn't travel that far, and usually that requires kind of deployments that are more suitable for dense urban areas where you need a lot of capacity. But 5G also worked on the same spectrum assets that sell phone companies and networks use today, what's called the sub-6 gigahertz spectrum or sub-6. And that's the same spectrum, the same frequencies that operators are using today for wide coverage, and you will see 5G there as well. So, and we expect long-term operators will be using both kinds of a spectrum, both sub-6 and millimeter wave for deployment. So yes, you will see more densification in those areas that require more capacity, again, like a downtown area in a city, but also you will see wider area of coverage with 5G using the same spectrum that's being used today with 5G, and actually with better capabilities, because there's new techniques that allows what's called massive MIMO, that allows the cell tower to focus the energy to be able to better connect with their phones. So even if you're using the same spectrum, in some cases, the performance of the connectivity will be much better. And going to your point in terms of the parameters, what we expect, depending on the deployment, is to see speed increases between 3 and 10 times in terms of your throughput speeds that you get on your phone, but also lower latency. And we expect download latencies being as good as 10 times better and lower latency as we have today. So your phone will not be just faster, but also more responsive by order of magnitude there.
Will this affect people more in cities to improve their communication speed and latency and the things they can do, or will it also fill in the gaps where there's not coverage currently? Will it shrink the dead zones?
Both. Because one of the things, for example, as in the sub-6 spectrum, as again, the network using 5G can focus the energy more toward where devices are sitting, that improves coverage. And overall, the connectivity that you get in what's called the cell edge, basically when you are very far from the cell tower overall. But what's interesting is that with 5G, as 5G networks are deployed and people start moving their connectivity to 5G, that benefits people who sit on 4G as well. Because at the end, the capacity is so much that you have within a cellular network. So as people start moving into 5G network capabilities, those who are staying in 4G will see less traffic on the 4G network, and therefore improvements as well in the performance of their connectivity. So at the end, 5G will benefit not only the people who moved into 5G, because they will see, of course, faster speeds and more responsiveness, but even also the people who sit in still using 4G, because they will see an overall improvement in the capacity of that network, and therefore improvement in terms of the connectivity. And that's what a lot of what's driving all this initial wave of rollouts with 5G. 5G was not supposed to be working today. When the initial standardization of 5G got started, the aim was to deploy 5G around the 2020 and beyond timeframe. But as people get consuming more and more data and consuming more video and doing more things about the connectivity, that triggers more urgency for network operators to improve capacity, to be able to satisfy all that increasing demand for data. And that's why with Qualcomm and together with other companies work on the acceleration of the 5G timetable. So 5G can be available as early as this year, right, with network launches across many regions. That's because of the need for capacity. So those operators that deploy networks on millimeter wave, of course, will be able to access new set of frequencies that were not available for mobile deployments before. And of course, that brings a lot more capacity into the networks and how they can serve their subscribers. But also those that deploy 5G in sub-6 spectrum, the more traditional spectrum, Also, because of these techniques such as massive MIMO and other improvements in terms of technology, we'll also see increased capacity in the networks. And at the end, all these aim to meet this increasing demand for data. And that's what's driving a lot of the initial deployments of 5G. And that's why we see 5G now a lot of focus on the initial deployments on these mobile broadband use cases. Because we cannot stop. We cannot stop just watching videos. We cannot stop like consuming or using more data is so valuable that, again, we need more capacity to be able to satisfy that data demand.
Are there people that are using 3G or even 2G in some areas, and how will they be impacted?
At the end, it's the more capacity, it's better for everyone, right? And the more capacity that we get in 5G can benefit, of course, people who sit in 4G. Today, at least in the United States, 4G is fairly prevalent. So for 3G, it's now being for voice and kind of some connectivity in just kind of some areas. But again, overall, the more capacity that you have in the network overall, the more traffic you can drive on it, whether you're using 3G, 4G, or 5G. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's just me, but I've seen, on my phone when I get into areas that, have poor coverage, the phone will revert to 3G to try to keep communication up. But is that infrastructure still in place? Is it necessary with 5G, or will it be abandoned?
I don't know what will be the carrier plans on those 3G networks. But I can tell you that all of the activity will continue on improving the capabilities of the 4G network overall. So that will not stop, and we see 4G further evolving to provide this additional capacity that people need in their phones. But also a lot of activity starting this year with 5G as well to create and evolve that capacity.
All right. So right now it's 2019. So you're saying 5G will start out where? In a few test cities, or will it be a big rollout? And when? The end of this year, or not till next year?
Yeah. No, it's on the next few weeks. So we have operators that as soon as this month, right, will start going live with 5G networks that still will be on certain cities, but they're already, at least in the U.S., for example, you see all the major carriers with plans to start deploying 5G. Some of them between 9, 20, 30 cities expect to be covered, at least with some level of presence with 5G as early as this year. And we're seeing the same in Europe, China, Japan, Australia, South Korea, many regions. What's interesting, Richard, is that we have never seen that such as accelerated pace moving into a new generation of cellular technology as we're seeing today with 5G. And let me put you one example for that. So when 4G launched first time in December of 2009, Telesonera, right, in Europe. When they first launched, at that time, there were no lots of carriers really committed to moving into 4G. Maybe 3 or 4 carriers with hard plans to move into 4G. At that time, there were 2 competing standards. It was LTE and WiMAX. And some carriers rightfully were waiting, right, and seeing which standard was getting more traction before making capital investments to deploy 4G networks at that time. Same thing with the device manufacturers. There was probably 3 or 4 with hard commitments and plans to develop and commercialize 4G devices about 10 years ago. The picture today is very, very different. Today, we have just one single standard or specification for 5G that is globally accepted, which is called 5G NR. So operators don't have this uncertainty in terms of which specification will prevail. There's just one. And that creates more confidence to do the capital investments to deploy 5G networks in a much faster fashion. Same thing with the device manufacturers. And that's why you see today there are more than 20 operators globally that have plans to deploy 5G in the next few months, if not next few weeks, starting. And more than 20 device manufacturers with plans to kind of commercialize 5G devices. We expect this year that virtually all the major Android phone manufacturers will be commercializing flagship smartphones with 5G. and we saw a good number of them at the last Mobile Congress in Barcelona in February, launching those devices. So the level of activity, if you compare the launch of 4G with the launch of 5G, the level of activity that we see today is much higher. It's much more concentrated, and over the next few weeks, I'll be very busy with activities across China, Europe, United States on network and device launches. We have never seen this level of widespread industry support and acceleration toward a new generation of cellular technology. And remember, 5G was not supposed to be working this year, was not supposed to be commercialized this year, but the whole industry saw the need to accelerate the deployment, and that's why 2018 is now the year for 5G. Very exciting.
Yeah. So am I going to wake up in a few weeks or a few months and my phone will ask me to update it and then it'll magically be on 5G? Will it be that seamless for some users?
For some of them, yes. Well, if you need a 5G device. One of the things about 5G is that it's not backwards compatible necessarily with 4G networks. What drives many times the transition to a new cellular technology is that how you add capabilities that at some point become impossible to sustain while maintaining backwards compatibility, and that's why we see now a new generation of cellular technology. So, but if you get a 5G device shortly, right? Yes, you might see that coverage increasing, and one day, yes, you might wake up and you might have your 5G coverage already in your city. Again, there's plenty of announcements already from the operators here in the United States. All of them, the major carriers, being very excited and with solid plans to deploy 5G. So, of course, it's a gradual process, right? You cannot deploy a network overnight, but the pace in which these are being planned and deployed is much faster than we have seen anything else we have seen before in other cellular transitions.
Okay. And then, so first thing that probably will be affected are smartphones. What about, you said, cars now being connected to each other? Will that take several years for 5G to be implemented in them? Or is it in there and it's just silent for now, waiting to be used?
No, just in the case of mobile phones, right? In vehicles, for example, we also see an accelerated transition into the next generation of cellular technologies. Again, I'll use the example of comparing the transition to 4G. So between the launch of the first 5G network and the announcement of the launch of the first 4G network and the launch of the first 4G car, there were about 4 years, right? So the first network of 4G launched in 2009, and the first car was an Audi, was announced on 2013. So you saw a span of 4 years between the launch of the technology and adoption in the automotive space. This time, it will be a much shorter span, right? We expect now with cars with 5G being commercialized as early as 2021. Actually, at Qualcomm, we already got a design win with one automaker to provide 5G technology for their vehicles. So, and you see even on the specification and standardization effort, car manufacturers and the whole ecosystem is much more involved into driving what it will be 5G, because they know that they will need a network that is able to support the requirements for the automotive industry. A few years ago, there was a 5G automotive association that was created in Europe, but with a global nature, to be able precisely to work on providing input on the standardization efforts to accommodate the requirements of the automotive industry. And that industry association, in just a matter of a couple of years, grew from 8 to more than 100 members today, right? And there you see mobile operators, infrastructure providers, semiconductor companies, and tier one suppliers for automotive industry, as well as the car makers themselves. So it might not be this year, but we'll see just in a couple of years cars with 5G and with some of the capabilities that has been personally defined for the automotive industry, like vehicle-to-vehicle communications, for example. In a shorter fashion, we will see 5G PCs, right? We expect to see 5G PCs as early as this year. And another interesting play is the fixed wireless access play for mobile operators with 5G infrastructure. one of the use cases that there's a lot of interest is how you can use 5G as a backhaul replacement or alternative to fiber or cable to provide fixed internet connectivity into homes, right? And you can use either millimeter wave or sub-6 with higher power transmit by using the customer premise equipment, basically the box that goes in your home and provides you with internet connectivity. And now with 5G achieving multi-gigabit speeds, basically you have a new alternative to provide internet connectivity, kind of a high performance mobile broadband into the home overall. So that's another thing that we'll start seeing this year. It's not just these mobile devices that we are usually expecting, like again, cars and PCs and of course smartphones and tablets, but now 5G being used as infrastructure to provide internet to homes and small offices as well. And all of that, I think we'll start seeing at least fixed wireless access, 5G PCs, and of course smartphones starting this year, if not into entry of the 2020, and cars following shortly after with 2021 timeframe with again 5G vehicles overall. Later on is when we'll see 5G going into manufacturing plants or what's called the industrial IoT use cases. Because the first wave of 5G specification had been focused on, of course, on mobile broadband on phones, but for the first quarter of next year, it's scheduled that we'll see a new release of 5G specifications with new features to be able to support these industrial applications or use cases. So, for example, how you bring ultra high levels of reliability into the wireless connection, achieving what's kind of a 99.9999% of reliability that's required for industrial processes, for example, that's kind of coming with the next iteration of cellular specifications, or the ability, for example, to use private 5G networks and allow this industrial conglomerate, for example, to deploy their very own 5G networks and manage that to be able to connect the manufacturing plant, for example, or any other manufacturing facility. That we'll start seeing later on as 5G specification standards continue to evolve. So we'll see a lot of it starting this year, okay. But 5G is designed for the long run, and we'll see evolution of the technology and, of course, adoption of use cases for many, many years to come.
Do you have people that are bugging you for 6G already and saying, all right, what's next? Or is that not even on the table?
No, honestly, I think it's too early for the discussion. Remember that what drives, from an engineering standpoint, what drives the evolution and the need for a new cellular technology is that when you cannot continue evolving the capabilities of a generation of cellular technology while maintaining backwards compatibility. With 4G, for example, the 4G that we have today is actually much more capable and very different from the 4G that launched in 2010, right? Now with 4G has achieved gigabit speed capabilities with things like carrier aggregation and the use of multi-user MIMO, as well as the ability to use kind of a more advanced coding techniques to be able to pack more bits and data into the wireless channel. So, but if today, if you turn on a 2010 smartphone with LTE and you connect to the LTE network, it will work, right? Because all these advancements have occurred while maintaining backwards compatibility. I think that, of course, as we want to evolve and bring more capabilities with cellular networks to connect all kind of things, there was a need for a new generation of cellular technology, and that was kind of came to as a result with 5G. It's probably too early to start thinking about 6G. We need to start evolving a lot of what will be the 5G capabilities before we start thinking on a new generation of cellular technology.
What about the security aspects? With IoT, the proliferation of that, and industrial applications, and car communication. I mean, it seems to open up a gigantic attack surface. So I would think that security has to be like a top priority for 5G. Outside of let's say cellular networks and all that.
Yeah, and yes, for cellular networks overall, security has been always a high level of kind of a focus from the industry on that, even starting from the cellular operators, because for them, this is their business, right? So they need to make sure that the networks are secure, and people can use them confidently, but also they can charge and money for the connectivity that they provide with this network. So as of today, even 3G and 4G networks are still considered like fairly secure networks, right? It's used even on financial services or even for government. Use kind of a mobile network, commercial mobile networks, to transmit very, very sensitive information and communications overall. So the level of protection is there. And without being much of a security expert, of course, 5G brings new security capabilities and technologies, so it will be being more secure than before. So you're right. Of course, 5G as being designed to connect not just people but all kind of things. It kind of increases the points, right, in which it can create security concerns, but also in the specifications has been a lot of focus to again make security robust. And so far, I think cellular networks have demonstrated that have a high level of security overall. That work never ends, right? And it's always like work to understand vulnerabilities and be able to patch them and overcome them. But net, cellular network has been proven to be very secure so far, and we expect even more robust security with 5G.
And then last question. How is 5G fundamentally different technology-wise from 4G and everything else? Can you give a few details on what makes the technology work differently?
Yeah, a few things. So, for example, 5G has been designed in a way that can accommodate many different spectrum assets, right? Going from the lower frequencies that as low as 600 megahertz that are used today in for weather area networks to what's now millimeter wave. The waveform has been designed in a much flexible fashion, so you can scale the ability of 5G to work on very high frequency bands without increasing significantly the amount of processing that you need to be able to manage those frequencies. So even if the baseline for connectivity is still using the OFDMA access technology, it has been designed in a much flexible way, so it can accommodate all kind of spectrum assets. Other considerations for 5G has been the more flexible transmit times as well. So, for example, with 4G, the minimum kind of a transmission slot that you can get it's kind of it's down to a 1 millisecond, right? So whenever you want to send information back and forth and use that for communications, that means that the overall latency of the system, right, when you send information to the internet, expect that to come back, could be in the order of tens, if not hundreds of milliseconds. 5G was designed to be able to operate in a much kind of a shorter time slots overall, even up to 1/8 of what's feasible today with 4G. And that has allowed the latency overall to be reduced down to the order of 1 millisecond, right? Which is what you will need for these kind of ultra reliable connections that require for industrial settings overall. Other techniques are improvements in the coding scheme, so you're able to pack more data in the same amount of spectrum to make connectivity more efficient. And things like beamforming for millimeter wave or massive MIMO and sub-6, which allows you to focus the energy and be able to use what's called spatial multiplexing, which is basically you're using the same spectrum from the same base tower, but sending these beams that connect to the different devices. So you can reuse the spectrum as you connect with multiple devices at the same time, and with that way improve all the overall capacity overall of the network. So that's just a nutshell, and there's a flurry of different advancements that can have been included in 5G overall. But net, I should say it has been designed so it's much more flexible. So you have flexibility in terms of the latency, flexibility in terms of the spectrum, and at the end, flexibility in terms of the use case that you can serve with 5G overall.
Well, very good. So what's the best way for people to find out, how to get into the 5G world? How will they know that the smartphone they have or the smartphone they could get has it? And how can they find out more about Qualcomm?
Yeah. Well, it's very easy. It's just as in your next phone, think about just asking for a 5G phone, and you will be ready to experience this feature as networks get rolled out starting this year across many regions. And to learn more, you can always just go, kind of a search for Qualcomm 5G or go to qualcomm.com/5G. And we have tons of resources information about 5G overall between videos, webinars, blog posts, etc. And of course, more than happy just to talk, Richard, to you anytime that we want to go deeper in terms of the 5G networks. It's a very exciting time.
That's great. Ignacio, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard, for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I hope.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.